So a couple days ago, Brennan, or also known as Quinlan Vos, released a video going over the Star Wars Legends books that do not have a Legends banner on them. Both the ones that don't have the banner, ones that only have the banner in their paperback printings, and the ones that we had previously thought didn't have the banner but actually do. There's cases where they do have the banner on them. And I thought that this is a very interesting topic, um, but it's a subpart of a much larger topic. That is the frankly terrible new fan experience when it comes to Legends. Now, what do I mean by the new fan experience? What I mean is that if you are new coming into the expanded universe, into Legends, and you don't know anything, and you just pick up a random book, then there isn't a lot that is in any one random book that can actually help you in your Legends journey. Um, and in a lot of cases, there's stuff that'll actively hinder you. Now, what am I talking about? Well, to use an example, at the Twinsons Foundation, twice a year we purchase books for donation events. These books are meant to go to kids, many of which who have never read a Star Wars book before. So we purposely get books that are either a book one or a self-contained story so that they are not lost. And because of this, we have a list of books, and we basically buy from a list of books almost every single time. We've been doing this since 2016, buying pretty much the same books in multiple quantities twice a year. So in April, when we bought a bunch of books for a May the 4th event this year, um, and I was the one who received the books, I went through them to see what the new fan camp experience was going to be like. And this is what I found. Of the books, two of them, Ambushakulia and Scourge, did not have the Legends banner on them. As Brennan pointed out in his video, these books do not have the Legends banner or confirmed printings with the Legends banner. But not only that, six books, the Han and Lando Adventures, Ambush at Corellia, again, X-Wing Rogue Squadron, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and Rogue Planet, don't even have the timeline in them, which is problematic because many of these are self-contained stories. The Han and Lando Adventures don't really have they're three in ones. They get through it, so you read all three books. You don't have a timeline to tell you where to go next. X-Wing Rogue Squadron at least has it'll say in it, oh, your Wedge's Gamble is next, so you can get Wedge's Gamble. Tells the Bounty Hunters, nothing there. Rogue Planet, again, nothing there. If you pick up these books and you read through them, yes, there's going to be a banner on them, but you're not going to have a timeline. So if you want to learn more, you don't have the tools to do so within the book. And I think this is a big problem because there is already a very high barrier to entry when it comes to the Legends universe and the knowledge you have to have in order to properly navigate them. There are entire articles and resources on where to go, what to do. It's and what to do. And there's a lot of burden on us as the people who know this to explain this to people. But I think that the novels themselves, the books themselves, and how they're printed can do a lot better to alleviate that. And here are just some examples of what I'm talking about, of things that are blatantly confusing. Again, starting out with, of course, Ambush at Corellia. It has no Legends banner, and it has no timeline. The only connection it has to the rest of the expanded universe is in the front cover. It says, other books of the Corellian trilogy, Assault on Salonia, Showdown at Centerpoint. Now, it's true that Showdown at Centerpoint does have a confirmed Legends banner printing that does have the timeline in it. So finally, when you get to book 3 of the trilogy, you are given the resources to find the rest of the EU. That's all well and good. But why did you have to wait till book 3 to get that information? Why not have that information in books 1 and book 2? It doesn't make sense. And on the case of the Legends banner specifically, not having the banner, it made sense in the beginning of why they didn't have the banner, because prior to the decanonization, Del Rey had already done several printings. Some of these printings were still in store. Some of these printings were still in warehouses. They weren't just going to destroy all of these printings and reprint them again. That's a huge waste of time and money. They're going to send them out until the stock of pre-2014 books had bought out, and then once that had happened, they would print new copies with the Legends banner. And that was reasonable for a time. But it is 2023. It has been 9 years since decanonization. Can you really expect us to believe that there are still copies of Ambushakulia out there that have been unpurchased that are sitting in warehouses from pre-2014 printings? I think that's not. I think that's not a reasonable assumption. I think it's that they have been reprinting these just for some reason. They haven't been giving them the banner, and they haven't been giving them the timeline. But it goes further than that, because on some of the things that they are reprinting, like, for example, Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which is just one example of this, but a lot of them have this, they are including the canon novels as promos in the front and back covers, which is incredibly confusing. Because if you are going off just what's in the book, maybe you have a banner, maybe you have a timeline, but then there's also these other Star Wars books that aren't in the timeline but are being promoted. So what are you to do if you don't know anything with this information? The book itself doesn't clearly specify the difference between Legends and canon, or that aside from the banner that this is a Legends book, but these books don't have the banner on them, and other Legends books don't have the banner on them. So you can see where this gets confusing, again, for someone that doesn't know. But it gets worse when you go to the Essential Legends collection. Because, while admittedly not all of them have this, a lot of them, like Dynasty of Evil, for example, have an excerpt at the very end of it for the High Republic Light of the Jedi. If they have an excerpt at all, it is almost always Light of the Jedi, which is a canon book, a part of the Essential Legends collection, technically, because it's in a lot of them. Why? If you're going to make the distinction of this is Legends, this is canon, and the Essential Legends collection even has a little blurb about what is Legends in it, why are you then, at the end of this trilogy, going to say, by the way, here's High Republic? It doesn't make sense. And for a new fan who doesn't know about these things, it's going to be extremely confusing. Now, this isn't the only instance of confusion that can come just confusion between Legends and canon. Another bit of confusion can be in how they're reprinting the short stories in the timeline. Because in the paperback edition of Star by Star, they have in the prologue Recovery, the short story, also written by Troy Denning, which canonically takes place several books before this in New Jedi Order. It's well before Star by Star. You read it around the time of Balance Point and Edge of Victory. Is when you're supposed to read it, timeline-wise. But it's in the prologue of Star by Star. So if you're reading through New Jedi Order, and you're just going book to book, you're reading front cover to back cover, you're going to get to Star by Star, which is already an extremely long book, and you're going to get a 80-ish page prologue that is a short story that happened 2 books earlier. And it's not going to connect to anything in the book. It's not going to make any sense to you. And if you think this is a very weird niche example, no one's done this, I have seen a Facebook post of someone who was doing exactly this. On their first reread of New Jedi Order, they got to Star by Star, and they complained about the 86-page prologue that had nothing to do with the rest of the book, because they didn't know it was a short story that would come earlier. And again, this isn't the only example. The other big example that I can think of this happening, of weird inclusions of short stories where they don't make sense timeline-wise that are confusing, is in the Republic Commando series. Because Book 2 of Republic Commando series, 000, has the short story Targets, which is at the end of the book, despite the fact that the short story Targets takes place between Books 1 and Books 2. But you don't get to it, again, if you don't know anything about the Republic Commando series, you're reading for the first time, you don't know, you're just reading the books in the order and reading them cover to cover, you get to the end of Book 2, and you get to the short story that is Book 1.5. And this kind of wouldn't be a problem if 000 didn't heavily reference this short story throughout it. You go through the book when you're reading it, and there are constant shout-outs to the short story that makes you feel like, wait, am I missing something? What did I miss? Is there a story that I missed here? Because they keep referencing this thing that happened, but I don't know about it. And then you get to the end of the book, and you're like, oh, that's that thing they were referenced. Great. I wish I'd known that earlier. And the thing with Republic Commando is that it did it twice, because True Colors has the exact same issue. It has a short story, Odds, that is at the end of the book, but is between books 2 and 3. So it is book 2.5 technically in the series. But if you're reading book 2, then you go to book 3, you read through book 3, you see all these references to the short story that, again, you don't know, you're not familiar with, because you think, am I missing a story? Then you get to the very end of it, oh, here's that short story. It's confusing. It's not conducive to it's not intuitive to a new reader to go to the back of the book to the short story that takes place before the book they're reading. You're not going to do that unless you already know. And if you're just going by the information that's in these books, you don't know anything else, you're not in the community, you are not going to know. And the final, most, in my opinion, infuriating aspect of this confusion goes back to the missing canons again. Because in all of the novelizations for the OT and the prequel trilogy, Revenge of the Sith being the most blatant example of this because of what Revenge of the Sith is, there is the canon timeline. These books do not have the Legends banner on them, despite them being legends, despite the story group agreeing that these are not part of the new canon. They heavily tie into Legends, but they have the canon timeline in them. So if we're telling people only read the books with the Legends banner on them, not only are they going to be missing out on the books that for some reason still haven't been reprinted with the Legends banner on them, but they're going to be missing out on the novelizations, which are fantastic, important aspects of the overall Star Wars story. And on the flip side, this isn't just bad for us, but it's bad for canon fans, because if they're trying to be a canon only fan and they're reading through their canon timeline, they're going to get to these books and there's going to be a whole bunch of references to things that happened in Legends in them, because that's just how these books are. They are legends, except they're not being printed as such, and they have the wrong timeline in them. It's confusing for both sides of the issue. Now, ideally, I would prefer if that this was obviously better. I would like all of the books that are legends to have the banner on them, to have the timeline on them, preferably have the timeline at the end, just so that the person reading it isn't overwhelmed with information until they've already finished the story and know for a fact that, yeah, I want to get into this. And maybe even in the timeline, just have like an arrow that's like, well, you are here. So that way they know, what book comes next timeline wise. And yes, I know that there are problems with the Del Rey timeline, but it's still, roughly speaking, good enough for someone who doesn't know what they're doing. And also have in these books, again, stop with the promotions for new canon books, and definitely stop in the Essential Legends Collection case with the inclusions of excerpts from Light of the Jedi, just to kind of keep confusion to a minimum. And also maybe, if they could, I don't know if they'll ever do this, but explain the difference between the Legends and the canon timeline, and that the Legends is its own continuity that all tells one story, that they're all connected. And if you want to read more, here's the timeline. Just to, again, ease the burden of new fans coming into this, and kind of make that barrier to entry much lower. But that is all. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think. Also, I would really like to start bringing up this discussion more of the new fan experience, particularly when it comes to when we start making recommendations. Like I would really like the community to come together and figure out just what books don't have the timeline in them, don't have the banner on them, so we know when we're recommending something to someone new where to avoid, honestly, so that, again, they can figure it out on their own as best as possible, so that they're not lost, that they're not confused. But that is all, and as always, Take care.